Beginning of last summer, the chairs of the three independent water utilities in West Des Moines, so it'd be Des Moines, or in central Iowa, Des Moines, West Des Moines, and Urbandale, got together to have discussions about potential regionalization of water, and they had taken it far enough where they asked the mayors of those three cities to get involved in those conversations. That had advanced far enough that we asked additional mayors from Ankeny, Waukee, and Johnston to join the conversation. And I think the overall agreement was there was a study done by Des Moines Water Works that was reviewed and I think approved by the West Des Moines Water Works Utility and the Urbandale Water Utility that suggested over the next 40 years central Iowa is going to be 47.5 million gallons of water short of what we're producing today based on the demand. And the overall question that we asked that everybody answered in the same direction was, doesn't it intuitively make sense that it's going to be more economical and better for all of us to produce that water together than to have individual water utilities or cities start constructing their own production facilities? Because at the time, the Urbandale Water Utility had spent a significant amount of money on a water source and maybe building their own facility. The West Des Moines Water Utility in Waukee had been studying the potential to construct another water production facility on the western side of West Des Moines. And at that point, everybody stepped back and said, you know, does this make sense? First of all, should be a lot more expensive to have multiple plants with multiple operations. And if those three cities no longer purchase water from Des Moines, it's really going to adversely impact the people that do buy water from Des Moines because their costs are going to go up and we've been using the number 40%. If you lose 40% of your customers and you still have your same fixed costs, the cost for the water for those other communities is drastically increased. So shouldn't we study the notion of, aren't we better off over the next 4 or 5 decades to produce this water together? And then you got into, and I think everybody said intuitively, yes, it does. So let's talk about that. And then you got into some bigger questions to say, okay, one of the critical components of that is going to be then every city and utility that participates in the regional entity, if it's formed, has to agree that they will not go out and produce their own water. We can't build a regional facility if later on our customers decide they're going to pull out and go produce their own water. I think everybody acknowledged that that would make sense, but in exchange for that, the regional utility is going to have to promise each one of the cities and the water utilities that the regional utility is going to be able to provide the water that that group needs. Because if you can't provide the water we need, then we need to go produce ourselves. So if the regional entity would agree, we will make sure that we can provide the water within reasonable demand of what the cities and water utilities want, then that makes sense. And second of all, can they produce it? Can the regional utility produce it more economically than we can produce it on by ourselves? If all that's true, doesn't it make sense that we ought to form a regional utility? And so, you know, we have a memorandum of understanding that's being circulated. I think the goal is on February 7th or 8th to get together and try to finalize the memorandum of understanding. If we can do that and everyone can sign it, then I think we've sent the message to Central Iowa that we feel like we have a framework to really now get into the details to see if we can come up with the formation of a regional utility. So there's a lot of good information in the memorandum of understanding, but generally that's the 30,000-foot view. I guess the other component that was important based on all the input that we heard during the legislative discussions to the local residents were they didn't want their water utility to lose control over the rates and the distribution. So part of this understanding is the regional utility is going to provide the water wholesale, produce it at wholesale rates, but all the existing water utilities are going to remain as is. So when that water gets delivered to Urbandale, West Des Moines, or Des Moines Water Utility, their water boards are going to set the retail rates. Their water boards are going to continue to be responsible for the entire distribution system as they are today. They're going to have to put in the water lines, they're going to have to maintain them, they're going to have to control the pressures. So we felt like this was a win-win for everybody because now the regional groups, which we heard loud and clear from our residents that they wanted their boards to have control over those issues, all of that will remain under the exclusive jurisdiction of either the city or the independent utility. we're hoping to have workshops to finalize the MOU.
Okay.
I've sent out the MOU to everybody and said, would you please get any suggested changes to this to the consultant by February 5th, and we'd like to schedule a workshop on the 7th, and if we need a second one on the 8th, to go through everyone's comments to see if we can all mutually agree on a final memorandum of understanding that could be signed then. Then I think it's our view, it could take 6 months to 9 months to work through all the nuances of actually a 2080 or a 28F agreement, whichever the legal structure, and we have the attorneys looking at that, whatever the legal structure is to form the utility. It could take 6 or 9 months to come up with the details to actually have a specific agreement that then could be finalized and voted on.
And who would vote on that?
Well, Jody might know better than I, but I think the individual water utilities, West Des Moines, Urbandale, and Des Moines would have to vote, and then I think the cities that don't have independent water utilities, I think the city councils would have to vote.
That's correct.
Okay.
So it's not a referendum of the citizens, is what you were getting at, I think.
I think that's one of the questions, is that,
We haven't had the conversation if we should do it. I think right now we've been advised legally it doesn't have to be done. I think our goal through this whole thing would be, if we got that far, what we would communicate to our residents and ratepayers is, this is an alternative that will provide all the water that we need in the next 40 or 50 years. It will do it at a more economical price, and your current authority over your water will continue to maintain all that authority that they've had, other than the actual production of the water itself.
mm-hmm. And memorandum of understanding, so what exactly does that commit the various entities to?
Well, obviously the next step to put together the actual agreement, but if it goes through here and it talks about the agreed upon objectives, what the membership could be, what the weighted voting would be, what the governance would be, it goes through what I would say all the critical business points, because if you can get these business points agreed to, you'd like to think then that we could work out the details.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it also talks about transfer of assets, which I'm sure is going to be one of the biggest sticky issues there. So can you explain that part of it and how that's proposed would work?
Well, I think what the final conversations was, if we're really going to create a regional water production utility, all production assets need to be transferred into the regional utility. We had originally started out with just 2 or 3 of the Des Moines plants. West Des Moines has a plant and Altoona has a plant. And during the conversations it was brought up, look, if we really are going to do this regionally, all the production assets need to come in. So what we've done in the memorandum of understanding is talked about what the trigger points are for the various production assets to come in on a worst case scenario, they're all in within 10 years. But there's some trigger points that would bring them in. But at least our working group has acknowledged that for this to work, this regional entity needs to have the ownership of all the production assets.
And the majority of those right now are held by Des Moines Water Works.
And West Des Moines.
And, well, what's the breakdown on that?
10 million gallons a day,
Yeah,
up
right.
to 12 at West Des Moines,
Okay.
and the rest is at Des Moines. Approximately 85 million is what our peak is.
So the majority
Right.
of the assets are good.
Altoona would have a small number, and Oak City less than 1 million gallons a day.
But isn't Altoona producing all their water, or are they buying some from?
They're buying a little,
Little.
not much.
Okay. Okay.
Grimes is Grimes included?
They've not been at the table yet.
But they've recently, I think, had a change in mayor and have expressed an interest in being involved.
Okay.
So we hope that happens.
So, Sue, as far as your board goes, what's the, they have not agreed on this memorandum
No.
and transfer of assets, et cetera, so.
Correct. All of our board members, we've had public meetings for all of the workshops, so board members have been invited. The majority of them have attended at least one meeting, but we have not agreed to the transfer of assets, which, back to the point that Mayor Gear made at the beginning, we had some guiding principles, and one of them was we will not transfer assets. But as we started the discussions, it was important to say, if we're going to give this new regional entity some teeth, we need to give them some assets and start to control this and not wait until the next plant is built. So our board is now looking at the memorandum of understanding, which, as we view it, kind of, I think as our group here views it, it's a foundation to begin then really a further negotiation and legal contract. We're working to better define process. So what does this mean if we approve the MOU and we submit changes? And are there any showstoppers? So our thought is, and we just had a meeting yesterday, is that we would review this, come to a workshop just of our board members, again a public meeting however, so that we could discuss things we would like to have the other suburban customers consider.
Okay.
One might
So-
be board makeup,
Okay.
as an example.
The representation overall, okay.
I was just going to ask about that. So let's, like, what kinds of decisions and actions?
Well, and I think we were talking about potentially this governance being modeled after what DART did and the governance. And the way that works is it's a majority controls unless someone requests a weighted vote. So I've been mayor 10 years and on the council 8. I can recall one weighted vote ever. So I think our hope is that you wouldn't get to a point, if someone's calling for a weighted vote because they have some heartburn over where they think the majority is going to be. So, I mean, we would like to think both at DART and here that, you know, you wouldn't have to have weighted votes because we should all agree on what's right. So just because it says weighted voting, it would be someone would have to require it before that actually would be triggered. Otherwise, it's a majority of the quorum that's at the meeting.
So for most business though, then Des Moines gets the same vote as Altoona. Does that seem right?
That's what's on the table.
Okay.
That's no different
Well-
than is currently in existence for the Metro Waste Authority.
Which is 2080, right? Yeah.
Isn't it the same thing, the WRE, Jody?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, so
Although the WRA has a little bit different because it's based on population. And so Des Moines is entitled to 8, actually 9 representatives, and West Des Moines could have 3, Ankeny could have 3. They've self-limited to keep the board numbers down. But there, it's the people at the meeting that are voting.
how many members would Des Moines have under weighted voting under this formula?
I think we're still waiting to get that calculation done.
Do you know?
It's based on water use. Is that what that's?
Yeah, and Jody, you can
Yes,
explain.
water use.
Yeah.
It's simpler just to say water usage.
Okay.
Because 60% is from the suburb customers, right? The majority of
It
water
depends on
usage
how
is from
you
suburb.
use those, how you
Right.
divide the numbers up, et cetera.
Sure.
So-
Okay, because it could be.
And that's why we've asked the consultant to put the ratio together. And the other thing that's important, it's over a multi-year period. And so it's not just the most recent year,
Oh, the 5 years.
five
Yeah.
prior years. And so, and that is based a lot on, there may be one year where there's a high irrigation. And so that drives the numbers up in some communities, and vice versa. It could be a dry year. And so we tried to massage that over a 5-year period so it takes out some of those peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
It's no different than the WRA. We use a 3-year flow basis on allocating budgets, et cetera. So,
Well,
same
so far,
concept.
the new DART board, no one's requested a weighted vote at DART yet. I mean, I think our view of this either works for all of us or it doesn't. That we shouldn't get into a situation regionally where it's a huge benefit to 1 or 2 communities and a detriment to the other communities. So, you know, that's the idea behind that. I think, you know, the other thing that we're discussing is that, you know, it makes sense for the region to try to keep this together because the water rates for Des Moines and their customers of Urbandale, West Des Moines, and Waukee left would more than double.
If they left.
If they left. And, you know, I think part of the response from the suburban communities on ownership is if we're going to give up the ability to own our own production facilities, we need to have an ownership interest in the facilities that are regionally being used. If I'm going to give up the right to have my own car, and we're all going to lease a car together, I better be able to use that car when I need to and where I need to go. Otherwise, why would I give up my right to have my own car? So in exchange, you know, we're saying, okay, none of us will build our own plants, but we have to have ownership of the regional facilities that are producing the water, because we're giving up our right to own our own plant.
But couldn't you still build your own plant under the guidance of a central Iowa regional authority? Like, couldn't you still decide through your board, your new board, to build a new plant?
No, we've all agreed we would give up the right to build our own facility.
But
So any new facilities would have to be built by the regional
Right.
utility.
sure, but you could still build one in West Des Moines and
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
and
Yeah,
have your
location is
board
not the-
run it or
They would be owned and run by the regional utility.
right.
But and that's the other attractive thing about this, because if you look at the redundancies, say West Des Moines, their Ward plant, Jody, produces 80% of what we need now, roughly, and we buy 20.
Not quite 80, but
So, okay, so then West Des Moines and Waukee build the second one, and the Ward plant goes out for a week. There's no guarantee that we're going to get enough water from Des Moines to cover the shortage. So now the residents in West Des Moines and Waukee, we've lost 80% of our capacity for a week. Where are we going to get our water? Under the regional concept is you're going to have to start with 5 plants, may build the one in Urbandale. So now you have a lot more redundancies in case something happens with one of your production facilities. Less likely that we're going to have to go back to any of the customers in central Iowa to say, you have to ration now because we've just lost one of our plants.
Some would argue that like Des Moines locked into its facilities, like the population has the facilities that it needs in Des Moines. So for areas like West Des Moines, if you want to put a company out there that needs water and you do it through this regional entity, that puts Des Moines on the hook, residents on the hook for paying for additional capacity out in the suburbs, doesn't it? That's one argument I've heard
Well,
against transfer of assets.
to me, the offset would be, but through the regional utility, we're all collectively keeping Des Moines' costs down. Because if they want to keep us in, if they want their rates to double, then chase us away. But if you don't want your rates to double, keep us together, because in the long run, it's going to be better water, more economical for you to support this regional production idea versus saying, no, we're not going to support that, and you can go build your own facilities.
So that's the biggest argument. I mean, when I ask myself as a resident of Des Moines, what do I get out of this? Or what does the Des Moines Water Works get out of such a deal? Is that the main argument, is that otherwise your rates are going to double? Or is there other advantages here that I'm not seeing?
I think the redundancy. If the plant at Fluor went out like it did in the '93 flood for a week, if we have a regional production facilities, highly likely that those production facilities could ramp up to provide the water to the Des Moines residents that they needed because they lost the Fluor plant.
I'd say another benefit is that if you think about it in a bigger picture, what's good for, say, the suburbs like you're talking about now, if they brought in somebody big that's apparently going to use a lot of water and drives up the cost for Des Moines like you're talking about, if it's good for that particular suburb, I think that action is going to be good for the entire area. I mean, the suburbs realize that they wouldn't be what they are today without Des Moines. And I think Des Moines realizes that Des Moines wouldn't be what it is today without the suburbs. I mean, we all have to go together on things.
Okay.
And also as a resident of the city of Des Moines, the way I look at it, being a lifelong resident, the cost of water is going up. It's going to continue to go up. So if we have the economies of scale of looking at the purchase of everything that we need to produce clean water for our communities, the larger area that we are doing that for, the more economical. You haven't heard one of us say this is going to cost less. Not one of us have said that, because we know the prices are going up. But consistently, we think the price of water today versus what it would be 10 years from now. And this is the next part of the engagement that we have with our consultant, is to start to give citizens some examples of that. What have other communities seen as cost measurements that they've been able to contain by going regional? So, over the long term, 50% of our customers are from outside the city of Des Moines, and have been for the last 10 years.
And I assume that would change too. That ratio is going to change over time.
What I don't want to have happen is to have Urbandale say, well, that 10% that you sell us, we're now going to build our own plant. And West Des Moines, the percent that you sell us, we're gonna go with Waukee and build our own.
So a lot of this is a defensive move, and not only concerned about what the suburban utilities are going to do, but also what the legislature is going to do. Is that part of the urgency here? Is trying to get this memorandum done that, hey, we're progressing?
Can I jump in here,
Sure.
Lynn? I think that is Mayor Gear has pointed out, we've all entered into this not just for the short term, but for the long term, because we're looking at affordable water, abundance of water, and quality of water. And we know that there's some issues around all those statewide. You know, what is our source water? And what does that look like not only today, but as we look into the 40, 50, 60, 100 years from now, what are we going to do, and how do we preserve our ability to get water, and what's our source, where does it come from, and how do we collectively look at the needs of the future of this region, not each of us individually, but all of us collectively. And how do we do it, and what does it cost? We had Black and Veatch come in and run a bunch of numbers on, you know, values of assets today. But more importantly, what does it cost if we had to build new? And the numbers that I've heard, Sue, are not 85 million. I understand we have a 75 million a day plant. We have a 25 million. We have a 10. So that's 110 million that Des Moines has a capacity to produce. What would it take to in today's dollars to come up with that kind of level of production? The number that they threw out was like 680 million. That's a number that collectively it would be hard for all of us to get our arms around. Let's maintain our current resources, but let's look at where do we get source water moving forward. We know that the collective best place to get it is surface water, because we know that around the world and around this country, draining aquifers is probably not the best idea, in being that most of them recharge over the millennia. And so, you know, I think we need to protect our source water. We have to work with everybody across the state to make sure it's clean and that all Iowans have source water. But how do we produce it in this region so that everybody gets what they want, when they want, hopefully at a price they can afford? That's why I'm in it. I'm not in it to lever the Iowa legislature, lever anybody else. I think we're all in clean water together.
But to your point, Lynn, they have been watching, and we've been keeping our legislators up to date since last summer on what our efforts are, because we want to come together and solve the solution. We'd rather not have them create the solution, solve it for us. We want to solve it, and we've been keeping them up to date as we progressed on where we're at. And at least the ones that I interact with that represent West Des Moines are pleased that we've made it as far as we've made it.
Yeah. And I'll go on by community. You were able to send so much sewage through the plant.
Yeah.
And as the growth came about in all of the area, that capacity was diminishing, and there wasn't that much of it. So there was a desire to make the plant more efficient and to take the combined sewers in the downtown area of Des Moines and get rid of the stormwater to make the water that was going through the plant. So there was a significant effort that we went through to change the structure for the WRA. So there wasn't an allocation that Des Moines got X percent and Ankeny, who at that point was not connected, and that West Des Moines got 1% and Clive got 1%. The desire was to get rid of those allocations. And so what we had in the area up until about 2004, we had disagreements over who was going to get to send the sewage through the treatment plant. After 2004, when we rebuilt the structure, the governing structure, we have had no disagreements about where the effluent is coming from. That is not in our vocabulary. It is about making sure that the plant is there and that the transmission facilities to get the effluent to the plant are available. Now, it's very expensive, but that same concept can work for the water production side. That we don't have the discussion that you referenced, whether or not something's built in one of the communities, who's going to pay for it, et cetera. Hopefully, by going to a regional water production concept, those discussions will also be history at some point. So we won't care whether the development is in Ankeny. We won't care whether it's on the east side of Des Moines. We won't care if it's in the Norwalk area. It's just going to happen, and we're going to make sure that the water's there in a plentiful supply. And if it gets to the point there's not quite, our buffer is shrinking, we'll go out and build some more capacity, just like we're doing on the wastewater.
Which is 28E, right?
28E/28F. The 28F is the financing side, the 28E is the operations side, so.
Okay.
And Lynn, I hope no one sees this as a defensive move, you use that term, but really a proactive one. I mean, we're trying, that's the reason the three chairs said, let's get everyone together. We know water. We know how to do this. And individuals have been trying this for years. Mayor?
Yeah. This started really, I mean, the discussions really, the genesis of this was a bilateral discussion when Urbandale Water Utility was talking about building a plant and acquired the ground, acquired the source water. Frank and I got together and we brought it together, our water folks together to have those discussions. Say, because at the time Urbandale was thinking, well, with the price of water going up, it might be more feasible to build its own plant rather than to do this. So we said, well, wait a minute. Intuitively, that doesn't make sense. We should find a way to do this regionally. So we started that discussion. We had the issue with the legislature, but really, I think the genesis was there is that we need to work together. This makes sense. Water going down the drain is a regional solution. Why don't the water coming out of the tap be a regional solution?
Right, and so I understand, and I would agree. Intuitively, it makes sense to have it on a regional basis. But has there actually been a study to show that here's where the efficiencies would be, and here's how much?
That's part of what we're looking at yet. I think we need to demonstrate to our ratepayers, to the ratepayers of the utilities and to our constituents. We need to demonstrate that. That's part of what we're looking at yet. Jason, our consultant, is going to help us with that. Again, we're working on the faith that it's going to show that. I think we are showing that, but part of the whole study and when we finally get to this point is we need to demonstrate those savings, and I think we will be able to do that.
Sorry, who is the consultant?
Jason.
Jason Mom,
FCS.
and he's with FCS.
Okay.
And again, we're talking 40 years out. Some people have come in and said over the next 10 years, it's cheaper to do this. Well, we're saying, well, we can't look at 10 years. We need to look at the next 40 years, 50 years. Our study shows we need 47.5 million gallons of water in 40 years. So why don't we study this over the next 40 years and not do something short term that then in 10 years doesn't work again?
That 47 he's talking about is per day increase.
Uh-huh.
And the economics are important. I don't want to minimize that. And I summarized that for the other trustees in West Des Moines this way, and they're in agreement. Historically, West Des Moines has bought purchase capacity from Des Moines Waterworks over the years, spent about $11 million to buy 8 MGD a day, and that amount agreement is good through the year 2045. The current rate is roughly $2 that we can buy that MGD. The city of Johnston is a wholesale customer of Des Moines Waterworks. They pay roughly $4 MGD, but they didn't purchase the capacity like West Des Moines and Urbandale and Altoona and some of the other cities. So that's the amount, difference in the rate amount. The consultant during the workshop process just roughballed that the cost for producing water regionally was about $2.75. And so we've got to get to the scenario by which the West Des Moines ratepayers know what our rate is going to be, the Johnston ratepayers know what their rate is going to be. There has been discussion by some that there's a unified rate, which would be $2.75. Well, that's great for Johnston, not so great for the other entities. And so the economic study that we've asked FCS, we're in the process of getting the proposal back from FCS to do, is to put all of those numbers together so all of our entities know what what's in it for them. Both.
So,
Jody, just
Wait a
to
sec.
clarify, that $2.75 that you're using, for instance, that's not million gallons, that's 1,000 gallons, isn't it?
Yes, that's 1,000 gallons, right, yeah.
Okay.
when is that due? That economic study?
The draft proposal that Sue and I have seen has the phase 2 of this process ending on or about June 30th of this year. We're going to have certainly more of that information up front, but we don't have it today. They have not yet given us the final proposal. I expect it here in a matter of a week or two. You'd say that, Sue?
So maybe I'm just being thick here, but why have the memorandum be done February when you don't have all the facts in yet on the economic study?
Well, that's where we're saying that MOU is simply, let's update as to where we are. It's not a legal document that says everyone is bound and tied to this. It's, are we all in agreement? We've been meeting since September, and so now we want to go back to our city councils, our boards, and say, this is our best take of how we can make this happen. How do you all feel about it? So that's the process that we're in now, providing feedback to that. You know, we started with the guiding principles. Look at it now as ultimately leading to a 28F. So I'd say another step. Mayors, would you agree?
And just to get a count on the number of meetings, since September, we've had, what, 15 meetings?
Most of the workshops are 2 hours.
Yeah, 2 to.
I think the other thing, Lynn, is I think if it came back and the water utility said we're not contributing our production assets to the regional utility, I think we're probably done with the conversation.
So it is a showstopper.
Yeah, because these other cities are not going to give up the right to build their own plant if they don't have an ownership interest in the plants that are producing the water.
Why is it, I see that in the memorandum there, like Des Moines Waterworks would be an immediate transfer of their assets, and then West Des Moines, Urbandale, Altoona are delayed. What does that mean, and why is that difference?
Part of that is the financial aspect.
Oh, did you
and
already address that?
Again, that would be an area yet to be discussed, because that, to Des Moines Waterworks, is something that we think that's too long of a period of time. Jody, I know that was one area that your group put forward.
We have the same end goal as making this agreement work. On the other hand, we owe it to West Des Moines ratepayers, just as Altoona does and Polk City, that have assets that are to be transferred to the new authority. We just finished in West Des Moines, particular case, a well project of about $3 million, round numbers, that we're paying for, the West Des Moines ratepayers are paying for. And we don't feel it's our responsibility to say on day one, here's the AC Ward plant, when we're still paying the debt on that $3 million plus the other improvements we made by cash. And so we are committed to working and getting that the assets transferred, but not on day one. There's a counter argument to all of that, and we don't need to get into it, but whether or not the Altoona plant, the Polk City plant, and the West Des Moines plant don't supply any water to any other entity other than themselves, as whether or not they should be part of there. We've gotten past that, but just be aware that there's some background there that those 3 plants just serve their own individual communities.
And that water couldn't go to somebody else based on the pipes now. I mean, it is exclusive to their jurisdiction. So if there was a problem in Clive, West Des Moines can't change our water production, our ward plant, and send it to the Clive residents because there's no pipes to get the water to Clive.
Would you be required to add distribution systems so that you could share in the production?
I don't think it makes financial sense, but I think what everybody said is but that 10 million gallons you're producing is important to the region, so it needs to be part of it, so we know that we're all counting on it. But I don't think it would make economic sense to put pipes in so that the ward plant can go somewhere else. I think it's important to the regional group to say that's an asset that we're using, and we're counting on that asset to continue to produce 10 million gallons year after year, so the other regional facilities don't have to pick up the shortfall.
each individual city's maintains ownership and responsibility for maintaining their delivery system, is that correct?
Yeah.
Distribution.
Or distribution system. Does the water that ends up in the suburbs, does that not already flow through Des Moines' distribution system, Des Moines pipes, putting added stress on them?
Not necessarily.
It's what's called a core network that's
Right.
part of that everybody pays for essentially as part of that, correct? Sue, you want to?
We are constantly reminded of that because in our boardroom, we have a large map of that core network and the importance of our suburban customers. But certainly, you could say there is some overlap, and that's going to have to be part of this financial step of the study to understand what is part of the distribution system, what's part of the production, and to separate those assets. And so that's where we need some outside help.
Distribution's outside of this, I mean, right.
Correct.
And maybe you already addressed this, but if you, like you said, if transfer of assets doesn't happen and this fell through and you built your own plants, is there any study or estimate on what that would do to rates in Des Moines and other cities? Immediate impact of that, or not immediate, but
The
short-term?
consultant, I think, did that calculation, and it went up to $5.77 per 1,000 gallons versus $2 and something.
The
For-
FSC
for-
did or
for-
Black and Beach did?
No, the current consultant.
Yes,
For
yes.
for Des Moines and the other communities like Ankeny that would continue to buy from Des Moines.
We've heard double, we've heard triple.
Oh, okay.
Just kind of as raw numbers, but certainly half of our customer base would be gone if everyone did their own thing.
Yeah. And I think getting back to one of Lynn's observations, the majority of the growth is coming outside of Des Moines.
Right.
And does this MOU, from the Waterworks Board members' perspective, does this take any powers that you already had as a board away, or other than, or what are those powers that you would have had but now you give to the authority?
Certainly it does, but the biggest complaint from the suburban customers have been, as we look at setting rates, they don't have a seat at the table. We haven't really discussed that at all. But a big part of this is governance. So certainly it would take some of our authority away, without a doubt. But that is part of the reason I think that we are having these discussions. And for a long time, I think that was part of the reason CERDWIC came to be, to have a better understanding of how rates are established and set. And but now individual entities want to be part of that rate setting and to have a place at the table. So I think that's a big component of this. There were discussions 10 years ago, 15 years ago, in the 90s, regarding the governance issue. And Mayor, I think, Mayor County, you were kind of referring to the work that was previously done by a commission.
No, by the commission, but also working with CERDWIC. Talking about what would it look like, how would we work together?
So,
Because Des Moines, I think we started serving one of our customers, Urbandale, I think in 1934. So we've been functioning as a regional water provider for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one of the big arguments during the Waterworks bill issue last year was that you can't dissolve an independent waterworks board without a vote of the people, and I think he already touched on this, but so you're not clear as to whether the citizens should have a say in any of this process yet?
well, the citizens definitely need to have a say. We just want to make sure that we are telling them clearly what it is we are proposing. And we haven't, we've had newsletters that we've been sending out to anyone that asked to be part of our distribution list on that. We've been sharing it through our ratepayers, and I believe some of the other entities have as well. So certainly, the 5 members of the Des Moines Waterworks Board represent the citizens of Des Moines. But we also represent, in my mind, the other 54 to 60% of the customers in the suburbs that are buying water. So this is a long time coming. I was talking to Louise Moon, who was on the Waterworks Board for 18 years. And you hit these points and you kind of think, oh my gosh, we're hitting our heads up against a wall. And she said, don't worry, we did that in the 1990s. We had the very same challenges, and you hit those tough points, and people will step away. Just keep moving ahead, because this has been a long time issue for our region. And we finally have all the right people at the table to make this happen, should each of our entities choose to do that. It's
But-
the best chance possible.
Just to be clear about that question, I mean, we're not talking about dissolving a utility.
Right.
Just to be
No.
clear, okay.
But the formation of any new utility, does that require any kind of vote by the citizens, or is that clear?
We engaged legal counsel early at the direction of Jason Lemmer, our consultant, and
I just never heard the answer to that question when it was
it is
asked.
our understanding that through a 28F, that a new entity can be established for this regional governance and for the production. Now,
Is it
as we
still,
get-
I'm sorry.
as we get further along, I mean, if we find out that that is not the case, then that's another hurdle that we will have to approach.
Well, and for us as elected officials, I think we need to be able to stand up to our citizens and tell them the reason we're even engaged in this is we want to see clean, abundant, affordable water into the foreseeable future, which could be 50 or 100 years. And that's why we're doing this, and we're putting our best efforts forward to have that outcome.
And this board would also have, I just was looking through the rules in the 28E and F, and so you'd still have the, like, just like Des Moines Waterworks Board filing a lawsuit, this board would also be able to have that power as well? Or would that take away the power from Des Moines Waterworks Board to
We have
pursue any
a
kind of
couple
legal
of
action?
attorneys here that could probably better answer that than I.
But Jody, wouldn't it be a legal entity like the
Yes.
WRA?
Mhm.
Okay.
So yeah,
Just
and it would
another
do its
step.
own financing. The
Yeah.
regional
Yeah.
entity would incur the debt, so that takes all the debt obligation away from the other entities that are doing it now and creates it in the central one. I mean, we keep coming back to the WRA. If it works for wastewater, why wouldn't it work for drinking water? I mean, it's the best example that we have on how well that works. I mean, we don't need 5 sewage treatment plants in central Iowa. They're really expensive.
I guess I'm just curious if you'd answer individually, if the hump can be cleared as far as basically pooling assets. Anything else in your minds that you're just really worried about still at this point?
Probably the governance. Because again, if communities are asked to forego their right ever to build their own facilities, they're going to have to feel like they've got enough say in the governance of it so that it's worth their while to waive that right. So, you know, and not that it's perfect, but, you know, we stress tested that whole notion of regional governance at DART. And I don't know that you could have done a more thorough process than we went through there. And I think the same recognition for mass transit, I think, even though water's more important than mass transit, everybody recognized we need a good mass transit system. And everybody said, if we're going to pay part of it, we want a seat at the table. Okay, but there could be some issues that, because of your size, you don't get to, you know, you shouldn't have the same vote as the rest of us. So here are those critical issues if someone requests a weighted vote. It's the same notion here. So my other big concern is, are we going to get to the right governance structure? Because you might have some communities that are going to say, we're not waiving all of our rights because we don't have enough say in the regional utility. We can't give that up.
So besides Des Moines, Urbandale, West Des Moines, Ankeny, who has to be part of this and as far as the regional?
How many
entity? Is
customers
there-
do we have? 23? Different.
The waterworks has 23.
I can't answer that
Okay.
number because we have some total service, some
Right,
production.
right. I mean, they're of different
They're all
kinds, and
different
so we have to deal with
Yeah.
how they're represented on this as well.
But I think to Lynn's point, we have to have a critical mass. To make the math work, we have to have a critical mass. And I think that was the reason that the 8 communities were picked that have been involved in this. You know, Waukee, Johnston. That's the critical mass that we're going to need to make the numbers work. So it would be, I think it would be problematic if we had some of those significant cities say, no, we're out. So what we're trying to do is convince them that over 40 or 50 years, your customers are going to be better off being part of this regional utility. you're going to be guaranteed the water supply you need at a much cheaper rate than you could ever do it on your own. Plus, you're going to be guaranteed redundancies that you don't have on your own. So we want to make the decision easy for everybody to say, yes, then this makes sense. I mean, why would we ever go on our own? Why would we jeopardize that?
I look at it, I'm very optimistic versus, I don't really fear anything at this point. I feared during the process through the fall, I kept thinking, well, this next meeting is a critical point. You know, somebody's going to push away from the table at this point. Well, we got through those meetings. We had a lot of difficult discussions. We still have some difficult discussions ahead, but I think the key thing is that we've gotten to this point. Nobody's pushed away from the table. We have a draft MOU, and we all recognize, and still, I think we all recognize collectively that we are better off doing this together than apart. So I'm very optimistic at this point that we're going to get this done.
I agree. I think the governance is going to be key to it. You know, local government is the closest to an individual. And you were speaking on behalf of being a Des Moines resident. And how does that affect you if you turn around and if you're an Ankeny resident? Up to now, you have no say other than the fact that I, as mayor, can come to you and say, this is how much water we can buy and this is what it's going to cost you. Well, if you're reasonable in what you are demanding or asking of your representative, okay, this is how much it's going to cost you and this is why. And we're going to have this much in the future because we've done and laid out this, and this for the future. So, you know, once we get through the next couple of meetings here on governance issues, I think it's going to be a win-win for everybody.
I just wanted to ask, to what extent is production capacity, does that weigh in like economic development, you know, trying to get businesses to come? Do they look at your production capacity and say? Yeah,
I mean, if you look at the data centers,
Microsoft for sure.
Yeah. But even bigger producers. I mean, the articles that we read, and we've talked about it at our board meetings. All the economic development folks around the country said the Midwest is primed to continue to grow versus the coast because they have cheap, reliable energy and they have plenty of water, and the coast don't have either one. So we've acknowledged, look, you can't have economic development without cheap, reliable power and without water, and we can't lose that advantage. And I think we all intuitively believe this regional entity would be a better way to assure customers and potential investors that want to come here. We've solved this. We have plenty of water capacity going forward. We're not going to run into a situation where we're going to have to say, no, we're done, we're short, you're not going to get what you need.
I mean, does that incident with the floor plant shutting down, that probably weighs on the minds of someone like Microsoft saying, well, if we're out of water for a week,
yeah,
you know, what are we going to...
Yeah, and if it's above 90 degrees, I just lost a $3 billion data center.
So are you able to now, if this were to go through the way it is in the MOU, West Des Moines could say, instead of, 10 MGD of capacity, I have 95 MGD because I'm part of, or I don't know if I'm...
Well, I think what we would, I think it's incumbent, we've talked on us that the regional water utility is going to have to guarantee each community they're going to get the water they need, but it's incumbent on those communities to tell the regional group what their growth is going to be so they can plan for it. Now, we've all acknowledged that you could have a Microsoft or a Facebook or somebody come in out of nowhere, and we'll have to solve that issue another way. I mean, we've solved that issue now 3 times for Microsoft in different ways, one of which was partnered with Des Moines and Des Moines Water Works. So I think we've acknowledged that let's all put together our budgets like we normally do to make sure we're protecting what we think our future growth is, and if we have a wild card that comes in, we'll figure out how to solve that together at the time.
And the solutions for each one of these is somewhat different. The Microsoft example, they're not going to use 1 million gallons a day, 365 days a year, but they have to have the ability to draw that amount if they need it under their specific circumstances. And so, as Steve said, we've got to figure out a solution for that. In this case, it was storage.
Yeah, which really is a benefit because the Microsoft at Willow Creek Golf Course, City of West Des Moines paid for a couple million gallon facility. It's on the City of Des Moines property and it's run by Des Moines Water Works. And 19 days a year on average, Microsoft needs it. All the rest of the time, Des Moines gets to use that water for whoever wants it. So it's a huge advantage to all of us regionally. So
And it's
we're
not producing, it's storage.
So I think we're less concerned about the one-offs. The more important thing is each community needs to tell the regional group, here's the capacity I'm going to need in the next 5 years. And it's unrealistic to assume that you could go into the regional utility and say, hey, I missed it, and tomorrow I need X more. Well, that's not going to happen, so you got to plan ahead.
We spent a significant amount of time just on this issue, and it's under obligation of service. Point number 4, and it talks about that any member, as long as they request it, and make the request reasonable in advance. So we talked about what do you do if someone says, hey, all of a sudden I'm going to have another need for 50 million gallons a day, what do? They have to provide notice to the regional entity to be able to gear up, build a plant, and provide that service. So a significant portion of our work went into the question you're asking.
But they would have to do that on their own. If West Des Moines was going to produce 100% of our water, we'd have that same analysis. We'd say, okay, over the next 5 years, how much more capacity are we going to need to make sure that we build for it? We're just going to ask the regional group to do that. If we missed it, shame on us.
Right.
But if you were a business coming in, I mean, I'm thinking all of the mayors have a much better position to say we are serviced by the region rather than we have a waterworks here that produces 10 million gallons a day. I mean, it gives you far more credit.
That was my question.
Yeah, it
Is
does.
So that weighs in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever lost any businesses because you didn't have them?
No, but some have been contingent on that. And I think, what we're proud of is the West Des Moines Water Utility didn't have the financial capability to build what Microsoft needed. They just didn't have the financial capacity. And so the city came in, City of Des Moines Water Utility, West Des Moines Water Utility, and we partnered on a facility that we all benefited from.
Anything we've missed here?
I think we've touched on most everything.
No, and I
I'm
guess
sure we'll come up with some more.
But
We'll give you a call.
To me, it's amazing that you can take this many people from this many different interests, and in 6 months have gotten as far as we've gotten on this issue. I think this region does a lot more collaboration than most people think that we do. And this is a heavy lift, and in 6 months, we've gotten as far as we've gotten with all these disparate interests, and everybody looking at this from a different angle.
Do I?
And while
We have
I'm
this
sure we don't
document
agree on every piece
Yeah,
of it,
you've forwarded.
we're still all at the table.
This
Right.
is the-
Oh no, I don't know what that is. Is that?
Oh, yeah, this is on their website.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is their newsletter that's being put out
Most recent.
on the I think the Des Moines. Do we have our own website for the regional group, or is that through the Des Moines?
We have it on the
Cerdwick
Cerdwick
site.
site,
Certainly.
Okay.
as well as Des Moines Waterworks under board meetings, and under that Central Iowa Drinking Water.
And it's also accessible through the West Des Moines website, West Des Moines Waterworks
Yeah.
website. So.
That waterworks bill was introduced into a subcommittee this past week, I think, or last week. Is that
Yeah.
a concern? Did that spur the production of this MOU when it did? Because
No.
I think some people were caught off guard by how quickly it was published.
No, the MOU was already being worked on. I mean, it's our understanding that if that bill didn't get assigned within the first 6 days of the session, they could never talk about it. So the issue was we need to get it assigned, put it in the drawer. Hopefully we never have to pull it out because you guys are making progress. But if you don't, we have the right to pull it out now.
And the bill is still active, so it's active through the session, so through this whole year.
But the
2 years, right?
legislators we're talking to, they want us to solve this. They're very encouraged by how far we've gotten.
But this is the culmination of our work from September on, and we were discussing the MOU and putting it together in early December after we really got through the first round of the initial talks. So.
Yeah, and a lot of the drafting was right before Christmas
Yep.
that was being worked on for it.
The last meeting I attended, I just didn't get the impression that you were ready to produce something like this, but I guess you missed.
The first draft we saw was right after Christmas, and we talked about it between Christmas and New Year's.
Okay.
And that's when I emailed you.
Busy holiday.
I think an important key to this is, and I think Steve mentioned it a little bit ago, that it's, what'd you say, 6 to 9 month process. That to do that, when you're planning for 40, 50, 60 or more years, we can't just throw this thing together. So I think we're moving along, I think, at a pretty good clip, but I think there's still a lot of stuff left to do, and we need to take our time and work through it. I think in the manner that we have been. Bob mentioned that the meetings have gone very well, and at this point, I don't see anything that's really going to derail that type of cooperation and progress.
Yeah, this is a caveat from our standpoint, though, is the excess capacity, according to Bill Stowe, is about 5 years. And I think from our standpoint, it would take a number of years to build a new plant. So I think if you look at it realistically, we can't wait too long, because if it doesn't work, you got communities that need to be building their own plant. And because none of us want to say, okay, you've run out of your capacity, you're on your own now without having the ability to do it. So there's some sense of urgency to do it right, but not to take long time, because now you might compromise an alternative that you have.
So you're saying what we have now is only going to be in excess for 5 years?
That's the estimate based on growth. And at that point, there's no other excess capacity unless people start paying for it now. And people are saying, well, why would I pay for the excess capacity now if I need to build my own plant? And so there's some sense of urgency. And again, I'm not saying that it has to be done in a month, but it's something that can't drag out for years, because now you're going to lose your alternative.
So we appreciate the update. Is there something, anything else that you're asking us besides just updating us on the progress here?
Well, obviously, if you guys think we're missing something, we're interested, and we've told other people that. Look, if we've missed something, let us know. If we're, if we could have a blind spot somewhere. So as you guys are going through this, obviously any questions or concerns or suggestions, we're asking everybody that's looking at this to say, are we missing something? Should we be looking at something else? I mean, we would be looking for that from you guys as well. Do you think about this, or what about that issue?
Mm-hmm.
We have tried to make ourselves available through, different parts of our group here to anyone that's asked us to come. The city managers, for instance, had a meeting, and so we brought in Jason Mung, and Steve was there, Mayor Gear, and we tried to share more from a financial standpoint where we are and a planning standpoint. We had a tour of the Des Moines Waterworks facility for all the city managers. So we've tried to keep everyone informed. And what can you do? Help us keep this a very transparent process, keep our citizens involved, direct them to our website, to all the material. We have recordings, we have minutes of every one of the workshops that's happened. So please jump in and be part of the process. I mentioned Louise Moon the other day. I dropped off the MOU to Louise, and let me tell you, she had 2 or 3 suggestions. She worked this for 18 years. That's the kind of thing that we want, someone that knows what's going on. And they were wonderful ideas. So help us make this transparent, help us keep our citizens informed. But it's a proactive, not defensive move.
Yeah, like I said, we're not going to kick the can down the road. We're going to solve it for 40 or 50 years.
Ken, thank you for your time. We're very interested in this issue, so
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
All right, thank you.